Today's module will be on intersections. Ken, did you want to do an introduction at all to say hello? I assume most people are familiar with yourself.
I'll say hi. Yep, my name's Ken Beer. I'm the principal engineer at Safe System Solutions and an avid bike rider and love doing bike safety infrastructure projects. And I will be behind the scenes, as Ilsa was, just monitoring the chat, answering a few questions, feeding things through to Max. And if internet went bad or something for Max, then you'd have me presenting a few slides, but I don't think that'll happen. So back to you, Max.
Thank you, Ken. Fingers crossed about the internet. Good news for everyone, for all those playing at home. We've got Wally back on board for this module. So remember, you've got to look out in the presentation for our good friend Wally the Wombat. He will be hidden amongst the slides, and it is trickier this time. So just keep a tally of how many times you see Wally the Wombat. This one not included. So you're at 0. There were a few little points that I got in at the last few minutes of last module. So I've just included some additional slides that I'll just go through now. One of them was regarding bus interactions and the idea of a floating bus stop. I've given this example here. This one's actually in Oxford Road, Manchester. So over in the UK. Gives you a bit of an idea of what's going on here. So this is the aerial, and a cyclist, maybe on an on-road or protected facility, they get carted offset away from the the bus zone. So that's where the bus pickup area is. And then they don't have to interact with the pedestrians at all. So the shelter there is completely separated there. It goes behind the shelter. So you don't have to worry about a person stepping off the bus into a cyclist lane. It's all separated from there as well. So that's a really good treatment if you've got the space or cross-section to be able to allow for that. Another example that I've seen, this one is in Geelong in Victoria. And this is where we've got a bi-directional protected facility. And similarly, we've got it interacting with the bus lane here. And I might just try and zoom in a little bit so it's a bit easier. The way that they've managed it here, there wasn't that same space to be able to divert cyclists around and to the back of the shelter. So they are heading straight through, but they've implemented give way signage to pedestrians. And they've also raised the section so cyclists are slowing down where that conflict point exists. So that is a raised kind of speed hump, supplemented by the give way signage. And it's difficult to see, but there's also zebra line marking there as well. So you've created effectively a wombat crossing. So cyclists would be slowing down there and giving way to pedestrians that are hopping on and off the bus. Another question that I got there was regarding bicycle streets. This is one that was taken out of a Victorian guidelines documents. And I think it is a little bit confusing because it is suggesting that the painted pavement is green the whole way through. I haven't actually seen an example where from curb to curb, it's all green. That to me seems quite... I'm not sure urban designers would be too thrilled with that outcome because that would be quite a lot of green going on. But it's just this idea of we've got these local streets that we're treating with local area traffic management treatments, like our slow points, like that one there, or speed cushion, speed humps, vertical deflection, anything like that. We've got this idea. That's kind of what is referred to as a bicycle street. So there are a variety of terms that refer to that specific treatment. Over in WA, in Perth, this is Elizabeth Street in the Netherlands. They've got these safe active street, which is a really cool example. I'd recommend you have a look at that. And it's exactly one of those environments where it's not like there's a separate cyclist facility. Cyclists are just encouraged to use the carriageway just like any other traffic, and instead traffic are kind of prompted throughout this corridor that this is not just a typical cross-section or a typical carriageway where they're the primary vehicle, they're sharing the space. So safe, active streets for those in WA.
Max, if you...
10.
talking about floating bus stops there, a couple of things. One question that did come in, I think it was on the Geelong example, was asking about people accessing the rear door of the bus with that sort of narrow um, raised sort of point. I'm not sure if it's just the picture maybe gives a slightly different impression there. It is actually longer than.
It is just the perception there. It is that would cater for the whole length, so the front door and rear door. Pedestrians step onto that platform, so that's just the view of this photo.
Yeah, and the other one around floating bus stops, which there seemed to be quite a bit of pushback on floating bus stops around associated with pedestrian access and especially vision impaired pedestrians and the like. A few sort of viral videos out there of people trying to navigate with fast moving cyclists through these floating bus stop areas, which has caused a fair bit of a commotion in our industry. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and particularly if they're very busy transport hubs and you do have lots of pedestrians using that space, and likely in like tidal flow, so a big concentration of pedestrians. I can certainly understand the risk there, but if you were to compare that with the risk of cyclists having to use the carriageway and having to just either wait behind the bus itself or kind of slink around it, try and merge in with general traffic to get around it, to me that risk is far more significant, because if there were a collision to occur, it's likely to be quite serious. Ken, what about you? Your opinion on that?
I agree. Just from that pure risk perspective, it's a far riskier scenario with vehicle to vulnerable road user conflict happening. I think, as you nicely showed there with the Geelong example, but there's plenty of other examples around the world, and even accessible tram stops in Melbourne. If you look at those, the idea of slowing the cyclist at that point can be a really beneficial one. A lot of those examples you saw out there on social media that were flying around, there was nothing significant to try to slow cyclists at this point where there was going to be a high concentration of pedestrians moving across there. So I think we can do more in the specifics of design, but it does make for a sort of good emotive argument when we put when people are putting forward the vision impaired pedestrians and the challenges there, which we really need to think a lot about. But in terms of like looking at this from a pure risk perspective, the cyclist being struck by a vehicle in that weaving interaction to try to avoid a bus is way bigger risk associated with the mass of the vehicles involved, the speeds of the vehicles involved, and the severity outcomes. We absolutely don't want cyclists hitting pedestrians, but under all empirical studies, that is a far less severe injury. But we can do a lot of work in the design to lessen the likelihood of that happening.
That's right. We don't have risk-free environments, so any type of solution that you're designing will invariably have risk associated with that, and it's unlikely you'll be able to eliminate all those risks, but you can look to mitigate them.
And a final point on the there was the slide before, I think it was, had both sharrows and bike symbols. So no, it was just a sharrow with the bike symbol. That's okay. I think people are just trying to get their head around how that all works, but it's showing that the whole area is shared.
Yeah, just the whole street there.
Let's keep ticking on. Get us into some content, Max.
Yeah, I've still got more actually. So I was going to show another on-road treatment that we didn't discuss in our last module, and I just wanted to close off the topic of on-road cycling facilities. And this one is, once again, got a few different names, but advisory bicycle lanes. And the way that you can think about it is, at all times, there are cycle lanes in both directions, on-road bicycle facilities. And traditionally, the way that this cross-section would have been set up is likely would have been wide enough to support 2-lane traffic, so 1 lane each direction. Instead, motorists get 1 traffic lane and they have to share that in both directions. Okay, so this is once again very low speed environment, low traffic volumes. You're thinking about that. I'll give you some examples just so you can kind of picture it a little bit better. But this is actually in Canada, in Ottawa, where this type of treatment has been installed, and cyclists do get this treatment all the way through. So their on-road bicycle lane is continuous. Motorists that want to access the shared lane, they are able to travel in both directions, but they have to adequately, share that space, give way to cyclists in the bicycle lane, and give each other way as well. So that's the kind of signage that they're using over there in Ottawa. We would probably use something a little bit different here within our jurisdictions, but we do have an example of this on Napier Street in Victoria, in Melbourne here. And as part of this project, which was implemented a couple of years ago, they did put together a bit of a graphic just to show the community how this new configuration may be working. So I'll just run through this in a few slides. I've got a vehicle on the blue vehicle that's heading up to the top of the page there, and also 2 cyclists in their bicycle lane. Now, if that blue vehicle happened to see another vehicle approaching, they both kind of slow down and they have to get to the edge of the road to be able to safely pass one another. The cyclists are not forced to stop or give way at any of those moments. And once, they've safely given each other enough space, they would be able to pass one another. So you can kind of think of it as more of those local streets where there could be parking either side and there's only enough space for 1 lane anyway. And if you're a vehicle, you kind of need to pop into little driveways and things like that just to maintain that access all the way through. It's kind of got that principle in place, but they've solidified or they've made continuous the bicycle lanes in these examples. Here's what it looks like out on sites. Very popular routes, and lots of cycling activity occurring there. Ken, any thoughts?
Well, there's a question in around, what vehicle volumes you'd be looking at these types of treatments.
Yeah, I realize I have been saying low, and when I say low, I'm talking 1,000 to 2,000 vehicles a day, that kind of range.
And a priority bike route, as you say.
Yeah. And I believe I mentioned this in the previous module as well, but I did some cycling over in Portland where this type of treatment is incredibly common. That's basically, they'll have an arterial road and then they'll have a parallel route, which is just local streets just for cyclists. And, they do things like this where they close it off to general traffic, but cyclists get to travel on through. So that's the super common thing. So every few blocks, you're not going to get rat running or anything like that because you've got these partial closures. And another similar example there in Portland where vehicles have to turn right, but cyclists can head straight through this intersection. All right, I've gone through a lot of previous content, but I did want to do just a quick review of our 360 footage of our previous module. So we got to share 2 different examples of on-road cycling facilities. The left one being a protected bicycle lane, and example number 2, riding adjacent the dooring zone. So it'd be great to hear your feedback if you had any issues with that or how you felt riding in those 2 different environments. Feel free to share that in the chat and I'll just check in with Ken. Otherwise, I'll get stuck into the content for today.
Jen's just sort of questioning any evaluation or any insights into how those different lane configurations are working in reality. Any reports coming out of that we know of?
I've been in touch with our colleagues at the department, and I'm not aware of any evaluation that has taken place, but there has been few staff movements from the time that specific project was up and running. So No, I can't point you directly to any specific evaluation for that treatment, but there are others, other jurisdictions in the States and things like that where you could, get a bit more information there about the effectiveness of it.
And the question, are you aware of any in Queensland?
Not of the advisory bicycle lanes, not at the top of my head, but I'm more than happy to be corrected if anyone knows.
Yeah, I don't know of any either. And any dooring issues associated with the bicycle advisory lanes?
Absolutely, yeah. So that it hasn't eliminated that dooring risk at all. And in fact, in that example on Napier Street, it's got both parallel parking as well as the angled parking. So it's got the dooring risk and also the risk of, when angled parking, they come out, they just creep straight into the bicycle lane because they can't see if there's any cyclists there at all. So it's got quite bad features in that respect. And no, it doesn't really address that.
Okay. And that is okay. Oh, we're mentioning Napier Street. It's Napier Street Fitzroy, sorry. Not we've got Napier Street, Footscray and Pascoe Vale, but no, this one's the Fitzroy one, isn't it?
Yes, it's a popular street name, I guess. It must have been a fellow called Napier.
Yeah. This one runs near the Napier pub as well. And then a comment that's come in, which should nicely lead us into a bit of this session's content. Felt safe, for an example, 1 there, but still felt nervous at the intersections.
Oh, very good. Wow. Today's agenda is, of course, talking about intersections, and we will be referring quite a lot to this document, which is very appropriately named Don't Give Up at the Intersection, because it's quite common for designers in the past and even currently to provide cycling facilities mid-block, and then once they get to the intersection, either just there's no space available, or they can't, remove a traffic lane, or they don't know how to treat cyclists. And so it's either left as a bit of a free-for-all, or it's not necessarily the priority. So we don't want to give up at the intersection. We acknowledge that cyclists tend to feel that intersections are the weak part of the chain and where they tend to feel most stress. So we'll go through some examples of what we can look at to install to better improve that perception of safety and the actual safety benefits as well. So we'll be talking a lot about this idea of a protected intersection. We'll go through what that term means and the design characteristics, go through some examples internationally, as well as have a bit of a chat around Melbourne's protected intersection. Melbourne isn't the only jurisdiction. There's a few protected intersections up in Queensland as well. And there could be others that I'm not aware of in other jurisdictions, so feel free to let me know. And then we'll also have a discussion around more conventional intersections. What other treatments can we implement there to improve safety? But yeah, maybe we don't have the same level of investments, or we're unable for whatever reason to install protected intersections. What else can we do within that space? So here is an artistic's rendition of Melbourne's protected intersection, and it does look somewhat similar to this. First thing that you may note is at the corner or the quadrant of each of the intersections, there are these, what's referred to as a corner refuge island. So it's just these curbed areas that serves a very specific function. One of the functions is ensuring that motorists are using this as a path to travel around, so they're not cutting the corner where cyclists may be propped and waiting, or where they may be turning as well. So it's trying to delineate that vehicle's path. The other thing that it does is it provides an offset from where the bicycle lane is, which is here, to where that left turn traffic lane is. So it provides an offset between those two, a physical offset. I'll go through a lot of detail around why that's so important, and that slide's coming. So I'll just skip straight over this one and get stuck into content. So within a conventional intersection, we would traditionally have our bicycle lane right up against adjacent our turning traffic lane. And for the most of this presentation, the real risk that we are trying to talk about is the left turn vehicle and a cyclist heading through. So that's the main benefit for a protected intersection, is that conflict. So left turning vehicle, cyclist heading through. Conventional intersection has quite a small offset because they're right adjacent to each other. Okay. A protected intersection maximizes this offset or increases the offset in order, one, as I mentioned before, to be able to slow vehicles down to ensure that they're taking this, tighter radius curve around the corner so that they're acting at slower speeds. So we know that speeds are so intrinsically linked to cyclists' level of trauma, but it also, slower speeds, more time to be able to react. So if there is a cyclist that you happen to see, you've got better ability to slam on the brakes and hopefully avoid a collision. The other thing is, as you can see in these two little shaded triangle shaped things, in the conventional intersection, a driver's line of sight is not necessarily focused on where that cyclist may be. So if you have ever been on a bicycle and you want to go through at an intersection and you've had a vehicle that's turning left in front of you, there is generally that uncomfortable nature of, do they know that I'm in this bicycle lane? Can they see me? Who's going to give way to who? And I should, clarify that there are road rules to say that if a vehicle has their left indicator on, then a cyclist must give way to the left turning vehicle, but not all instances there's adequate notice by the driver to receive that indication. Not every time a motorist doesn't necessarily put on their indicator either. So that's just what the road rules are stating. And if we compare that same sight line diagram to the protected intersection, you can see where the conflict point exists or where the motorist is crossing over. Cyclists are much more obvious and not necessarily in their periphery or, at the side of their vehicle. They're crossing nearly perpendicular, nearly in front of them. So it's a much better outcome. Improves the sight lines. This one is taken out of the TMR Queensland documents, where we've got a conventional intersection shown there on the left and our protected intersection shown on the right. And you can see, once again, those corner refuge islands, they're really critical, okay? They do play a key role in ensuring that vehicles are slowing down. We've tightened up that corner radius, and where that conflict point exists, they've got much better, motorists have got much better sight lines. Another diagram here. I wouldn't necessarily call this a conventional intersection because you wouldn't typically have any type of separating treatment for a conventional intersection. But I think this one on the left kind of illustrates from a ground perspective. If you were a motorist and you were turning left at this intersection and another cyclist was going through, because this is a separated facility, that one really starts to question, well, who actually does have the right of way there? And that one can really create a bit of confusion for priority. So yeah, I think that does a good illustration of showing how difficult it can be for motorists to actually be able to see a cyclist that's riding behind them. And another protected intersection example where you can see the offset from the left turn lane, that kind of distance is much greater. So you want to try and maximize that offset. Okay, we'll go through this overarching design philosophy that you can use to underpin any of your intersection designs to help craft a protected intersection. So number one there, as I've spoken about already, The corner refuge is really, really critical. We need that in order to slow down vehicles and ensure that they are taking this more tightened up curve and not just cutting across this area here. That would completely defeat the purpose of this protected intersection, and it wouldn't really be a protected intersection without it. So that's number one. Number two is a forward bicycle queuing area. Now, I will just confirm, because this is taken from MassDOT or a US reference, some of the language is a little bit quirky and not necessarily the same phrase that we would use, but a forward bicycle queuing area is basically just a space for cyclists to be able to stop and wait for their phase. So giving them space, to adequately provide for all of that. Number three, a motorist yield zone, or space for motorists to be able to turn left and adequately be able to sight oncoming cyclists. Ideally, if this was a left and through lane, ideally you'd have enough space there as well to ensure that through traffic would continue if you had just one prop vehicle, but it's obviously dependent on the space available. Number four is a pedestrian crossing zone. And I think this is another really important point, where if prior to this intersection, we've had separated facilities, so we've had pedestrians on the footpath and we've had cyclists in a separated facility, which they're in this protected bicycle lane here, then it's really good practice at the intersection to continue that separation. So not to just create one shared crossing point for pedestrians and cyclists, because inevitably you'll have faster traveling cyclists that will have to weave in and out of pedestrians, which is uncomfortable for pedestrians and cyclists. So just creating those two separate facilities at the intersections is another good bit of knowledge there. Number five here is another very important one to remember. But where this bicycle lane crosses, I'm getting all these thumbs up, where these bicycle lane or the pedestrian facility crosses over the bicycle lane, ensuring that we're providing priority and we're clear about where that priority is. So just like in the wayfinding example we provided in module 1, where we had that kind of Y intersection and it wasn't clear which user gives way to who. Same kind of principle at these intersections. We want to make it clear, okay, at this particular point, so a cyclist may be riding along here, at this point here where pedestrians are crossing, cyclists, you need to yield, you need to give way to pedestrians. And I may have said it before, but I think that's a much better approach to do than the other way around, which would be to say, pedestrians, you need to give way to cyclists, because pedestrians are not necessarily expecting to have that put on them. They're not used to having to read signs, or it's much easier to communicate to cyclists to slow down, give way to pedestrians through the use of a zebra crossing, because that's much more well understood than the other way around. So I think that's another good one. And number 6, pedestrian curb ramp or a pram ramp, just ensuring that you're maintaining all of those that connection from the footpath level down to carriageway level, and all the associated DDA requirements with that. Ken, any questions?
There's a specific one around the curb type for the islands, which I think you cover off a little bit later.
I do, yes.
So we'll leave that for now. And then just a few comments from people, which is good. Keep the questions coming in though.
Fantastic. Let's give a prize out to the curb question though, because that's definitely coming up later. So
it was done as an anonymous question. So
ooh.
Yeah, if you want to hear your prize, you can claim it by putting that into the chat. Otherwise,
how exciting. Okay, I'm just going to hop into some examples now, because I always find it's easier to talk through these things in a real tangible sense as opposed to just figures. So in this particular example, we are looking at the Netherlands, and this is prior to a protected intersection being installed. And the leg that I'm going to focus on is the northern one, or the one at the top of the screen. And it's a little bit difficult to see, but there is some dotted line marking there, which is the bicycle lane. So I'm going to draw the path of a cyclist that is heading through this intersection and what they would likely be doing. That's kind of their path. That would be their journey through that intersection currently in this configuration. I'll pick a different color and I will do the path of a left turning vehicle. Okay. So a left turning vehicle in that same space, maybe doing something like this. A little bit wonky, but you kind of get the idea. First thing to note is at the conflict point, you can see that's quite an acute angle. And as we spoke about with shared paths crossing roads as well, we do want to try as best as we can to make our conflict points perpendicular, because that maximizes the line of sight. So I would once again encourage you to put yourself in the perspective of a vehicle that's turning left at this intersection. And also because of the angle of this intersection, it is quite difficult. If you were to have to try and turn your head left and look for a cyclist that could be in the bicycle lane, it's incredibly difficult because they are in your blind spot. Even looking in your wing mirror, they may be completely hidden. So it's just an uncomfortable geometry to be able to play with. And one of the reasons that we are advocating for these protected intersections. So this same intersection now looks like this today. And I'll do that same exercise where I'll draw the cyclist's movement going through. So a cyclist gets carried kind of off-road. They may have to pause here and wait, just like general traffic has to wait at a stoplight. That's okay. They get the green, they can travel on through and continue their journey. And the left-turning motorist in this same environment is doing something more like this. And if you compare that angle to what we had before, it's much closer to perpendicular. The way that that has been achieved is by providing this offset. So ensuring that the bicycle lane is far enough away from the left turn traffic lane to ensure that we can maximize sight lines at the point of conflict. Now, I'll show you some images of what this site actually looks like on the ground. And I would love to hear your feedback as why I would actually question what's going on here. Or there's something a little bit peculiar, I think, about this particular site. So is there anything that you're spotting that you think, I'm not sure about that. I'd love to hear your feedback in the chat.
Well, people bring a few of those in. There was a question around motorcyclists sort of cutting through and anything we know about that. I'm not aware of that, although I do see some of those, electric bikes using these facilities. I'm unsure what we're categorizing as a motorcycle these days. I mean, I know in theory it's 250 watts, but there's a lot of things I scratch my head and look at and wonder if it's a motorbike or not. Right, sorry. What are we seeing coming in here? Flush curbing, raised curb, no helmet. Wombat sign doesn't seem to be belonging in the Netherlands. Signals.
I thought that was good Photoshop work. People aren't impressed.
Lack of visual contrast. Easy to drive right over the curb.
Yeah.
Where's the pedestrian crossing? Flush curbs, low curbs, curbs. And so that looks to be about right.
Absolutely. So definitely the curbing, that's kind of what I was alluding to, but also even the visual cues as well, using the same kind of colored material there for this corner refuge island. In the previous examples, I was showing that as a raised feature. which I would strongly encourage, because this is obviously the other side of the road. This would be a right turn, but going across that, if it's flush, is actually very easy to do, and you don't want it to be easy. You want to make sure that you've made vehicles slow down. So I agree. I think it's a bit odd that this is flush, but it's the Netherlands, so they're probably very used to have to slowing down at these intersections and expecting to see cyclists. So perhaps they've got a bit more freedom to play with there, but not one I'd be recommending within our jurisdictions.
And a couple of questions around pedestrians and where they're storing and how they're being catered for in this example there, Max.
Yeah, so the pedestrians are on the other side of this treatment there. Once again, it's not a clear delineation there. You can kind of see, I think that red signal there is for the pedestrians. I might go back to the aerial, it might be clearer. You can see the DDA. That's where the pedestrians are crossing. So just adjacent to the cyclists.
Yeah, just stay on that one for a second. There was some questions around those trucks or whatever they are up the to the right a little bit. Yeah. See that sort of truck parking area or whatever it is, loading on and off, and the interaction there between bikes and it just looks a bit, I mean, I suppose it shows that even, these places have things they've got to do. They've got to offload or unload stuff onto those boats or whatever it is. And it's not the ideal situation, but
That's right. Yeah. I can't give you the details about that, unfortunately. Once again, happy to do a site inspection.
Oh, I think I'm being told that they're offloading and unloading boats, actual boats. So that makes sense.
Good vision. I'll go to another example. This one is in Maryland in the USA. And I have once again flipped this, mirrored this, just to show it's on the left-hand side. Question for the group, another question for the group. You'll see in this particular diagram, I've got in the legend down here, some different materials being proposed. And at the corner refuge island, there's a proposed brick, and there's also a proposed kind of concrete. So there's two different materials being proposed there. Any suggestions why we may have two different materials there? Yes. I can see those answers coming through. Very good. And I also wanted to make a quick note about this particular intersection is it's also bidirectional. So you can see this northern leg here, cyclists can travel in both directions. So it's not only for one-way, single lane bicycle traffic, this type of treatment, you can have bidirectional traffic. All right, we'll give a prize out there to whoever said the mountable apron or flush apron or anything like that. Ken?
Okay, there was a few.
There's a few.
Yep, I'll work with Marissa on that.
Very good. So for those that are not familiar with that kind of term, it might be easier if you look at the one in the distance. So this one here. But basically, it's just this flush concrete apron or area where heavy vehicles or longer vehicles, they would be able to complete their left turn or right turn in this instance. And they may have to use that full area in order to complete their maneuver. However, general traffic, you're still encouraging to use the outside extent of that concrete area. So it's kind of got those two different levels, I suppose you could say. It still does have the raised section, which is where the brick section is. So they would have done some swept path analysis and said, we know the longest vehicle we've got going through here is 8.8 meter garbage truck or whatever it is. And this is exactly how much space they need. So they've designed the physical curbed brick there to, just be on the outer limits of that. And the mountable would be what a traditional passenger vehicle would require to actually travel through there. So Some good engineering thinking taking place there. Another example here. This one, now we've gone across to the United Kingdom. We're in Manchester again. And this one is the cycle optimized protected signals, or Cyclops junction. And a few things that I do like about this one. Once again, it's got the same design characteristics as we've seen. We can see we've got corner refuge islands at each of the quadrants. So those have been installed, very consistent. We've got the green. I've got some very confused looking faces going on. We've got the green bicycle lanes going on. We've got the red. Those are pedestrian facilities. Don't worry if your jurisdiction doesn't do that. That's completely fine. But what I do like about this particular example is these gigantic bicycle storage boxes. Now, I've already talked about we want to encourage cyclists to be using the protected intersection. So if they're traveling through, a left turn vehicle has much better sight lines of them. However, not all cyclists would use that. And in particular, right turning cyclists may not want to go and do this type of movement. And I should also say, they may have to pause and wait there because they're going to get a red light and then wait for their green and then pause and wait there because they've got a red light again. So some cyclists would find that far too circuitous, and instead they could prop themselves in this giant green cyclist storage box, hop into the central right turn lane, just like a general traffic would, and then turn right when they can pick a gap in traffic. So some cyclists are happy to do that. And I think this design kind of encourages different skill levels to be able to use this facility. So it's not saying that you have to do it, but it does provide that facility for those that are not comfortable within that space. Yeah.
Okay, quite a few things to cover off. Well, just while you've got that one up, questions just come in there with the center turn sort of pocket areas for people to prop. Is that meaning that filtering is still allowed? That's a good question there, right?
From my memory, I believe filtering is permitted here. Yeah.
Yeah, which does usually add a little bit of a challenge with cycle facilities because people are making occasionally that late call on when they go and then based on one particular thing. So good question though. Okay. So you showed a bidirectional alternate protected intersection, and this one's the single direction for cyclists. Is it more challenging for the drivers in terms of knowing where to expect cyclists to come from on those bidirectional ones?
Yeah, so we did have a bit of a conversation around that in the mid block, which I think kind of applies to here at the intersections as well. Traditionally, motorists are used to just looking for cyclists coming, in their direction of travel, I guess, if you were turning left. So yeah, that same kind of debate arises where we're not really cognitively designed, or we haven't grown up with that thinking of looking both directions for cyclists in that space. So yes, I think that is another consideration.
Yeah. Are you aware of, and I am not, any research on concrete mountable areas and cars using them? As in
general passenger vehicles.
Yeah, mountable aprons and things for trucks that other vehicles use them. I mean, from a principles level, like we try to contrast it with the pavement color, so it's sort of clearly not part of the road and things like that. We know some drivers do use it, so but I don't know of any research specifically on that.
No, I can't say I am either. I would say that it would occur, but to what extent, I'm not sure.
If somebody in the group does know of any research, pop it into the chat. Questions come in, and you might need to interpret it a little bit. Is there any difference between a protected intersection with and without wombat crossings? I assume that would be wombat crossings at the point that the pedestrian crosses the bike facility.
Yes. I see the protected intersection. To me, the main principle there is implementing that corner refuge island to ensure that you're maximizing those sight lines for left turn traffic. All the other factors are kind of supplementary or supporting treatments within that space. But to me, the protected intersection design is, providing that offset. So if you were to do a wombat crossing, that to me is like an additional part of the design, and it's not like it has to be organized in that way.
And another one, does this design have potential for queuing back over the cycle and pedestrian paths?
Absolutely it does, yeah. So you could certainly just see there's probably space for one right turn vehicle, and then the second vehicle blocks both the pedestrian and cyclist facility. So yeah, that's certainly although actually, sorry, wouldn't that be, I think the condition there would be this would be through and through, which means cyclists and pedestrians would be waiting here. So presumably when that went green, they could clear that area.
They should, but yeah. All right, good. Let's keep ticking along.
No worries. I'll show you what this site looks like down on the ground. And in particular, it's actually quite interesting what they're doing at the pedestrian crossing points. They've kind of flipped it to the other examples. So pedestrians in this instance are actually walking from the footpath and crossing over into this median area and then crossing on the inside of the bicycle lanes. All the other examples we had it was the other way around. So cyclists were on the inside and pedestrians on the outside. Here's just another photo of that particular site. What they've used to demarcate this conflict point here is just this yellow paint, which maybe in Manchester means something and is incredibly recognizable. But I think that's another real prime opportunity where we would certainly be advocating for zebra crossing or creating all of that as a flush area for pedestrians and making this a wombat crossing for pedestrians. So cyclists need to clearly give way there. So just once again, making it clear who has priority within that space. Ken, I might pause there and check if we've got any other questions. Otherwise, I'll give everyone a 5-minute break.
Well, there's a question in there around what you were just talking about, whether those should have zebra markings. But I think we're pretty much covered. So if anybody does have any questions, pop them into the Q&A. Otherwise, we'll deal with them when we get back.
Fantastic. So I've got 51 on my clock, so we'll come back at 56. Welcome back, everyone.
It was just before you get started, somebody was asking for us to include the location of different examples. And I was just writing back that down the bottom, you can see there's a link to the Google location of it. You can download the PDFs from the learning management system, but we might look to do that for future. Just note the actual intersection so people could Google that as they go. So thank you for the suggestion.
No worries. I'll look to rectify that.
We're also looking for the document that advises when intersection treatments come into effect, e.g. greater than 5,000 vehicles per day, etc. Whether there is some consolidated way to pick these?
Yeah, so the way that it is used at the moment is there's no metrics that I've seen that would suggest, well, certainly not publicly available, what specific volumes will be required to consider this type of treatment. What we're showing here is protected intersections are a really important way to improve safety for cyclists as they come up to these intersections. So where you'd be looking to implement them are the areas of your network where you are prioritizing cyclists. So if you've got strategic cycling corridors or principal bicycle networks or whatever terminology your specific jurisdiction uses, but areas where you've noted, yep, getting cyclists through this corridor is critical. That's when you could really try to advocate for this type of infrastructure, because we know that this provides a better level of safety for cyclists.
So there was a comment in there around lessening the conflict. This intersection design lessens the conflict points between cyclists, pedestrians, and vehicles, which was a good one. There's a question: should be marked Sharrow in the right turn lane in the middle of the intersection? Then I'm not sure.
Okay. I think
potentially,
because if a cyclist was using the right turn lane, should that be marked as a Sharrow there? So whilst I said that we're trying to encourage this movement, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that cyclists that want to do this right turn movement and feel confident in doing that, they would do that regardless if there's a Sharrow there. So I'm actually okay with not putting a Sharrow there. And also, yeah, just to try and say that this is the preferred route, and that's what we're really trying to push cyclists towards. And if you don't take that, then I guess that's up to you.
Just to comment in there that it'd be great if there was some sort of something to point at about intersection treatment form to be able to support funding applications and grant applications and the like. I agree with that. I'll note that maybe suggest that to Austroads. And in the next slide, I think it was, or the one after, there was these two little, the one after, those two little yellow, what on earth are those, eh?
You know?
No.
I don't know. I was hoping you knew. I know the double stripe in the UK, that's used as no parking. Which obviously you cannot park there, so I really don't know the point of that.
No loading, it says.
No loading.
Oh, Tom says, sorry.
Oh.
Darren seems to be sort of calling them loading blips. I have no idea what that is, but
there you go. Maybe they're easier to see on the curb than against the green. Just to like emphasize that no loading. But I don't know how you could.
No loading anytime. All right, good one. Well done. Prizes coming to people who know UK road markings. Tom and Darren, prizes there, Marissa.
We'll have a look now at something a bit more local, and a Melbourne's protected intersection. This is what the intersection looked like prior to the intervention. And the leg I'll be focusing on is the southeast quadrant, so the bottom right-hand side here. Bit difficult to see in this zoomed out state, but there is a protected bicycle lane. It's, for those who do remember, in our previous module, there was a photo of like a white bollard that was just intermittently put along the parking bays. That was this street. So just a little fun fact for you. But there is a bit of a protected bicycle lane going on there. And if you're cycling up to this intersection, it ends about there. And then there's nothing. And then at the intersection, there's just this tiny little bicycle storage box. And that's it. So that's how things went beforehand. And it really solidifies what I was saying at the start of today's discussion, is really common way to treat cyclists interventions at intersections was to do nothing. So we don't want to give up at the intersection. We want to make sure that we're providing safety through the intersection as well. So that's how things looked prior to the intervention. And if we compare that to the things looked currently or afterwards, you'll see the protected facility actually continues all the way up to the intersection. And then there's this offset that we've been talking about. We're getting further away from the left turn traffic lane provided. Now, for those that may have noticed, if I go to back to my before one, the stand-up lane arrangement, so that's just how many lanes at the approach to the intersection. I had a left turn lane, a through lane, and a through and right. So we had 3 stand-up lanes. That got condensed to 2. So now I've got a left and through and a through and right. So inevitably, the level of service or, the amount of through traffic that could get through here for general traffic would be reduced because your stand-up lanes are not the same. This once again goes to highlight why we're doing these treatments. And if you are writing business cases or you're in the project development stage, really trying to articulate your KPIs. What do you consider success for this project? And as it is cycling participation, if it is getting a greater demographic riding through these intersections, if it is improving the safety for cyclists, then surely those things would be able to, be at the expense of other specific metrics, such as the level of service for this particular intersection. So perhaps it is going to fare worse. Perhaps there will be congestion, but if this is on the priority cycling network, maybe we need to prioritize those cycling movements. So yeah, just wanted to make that little bit of a point. This is what it looks like in full now in the aerial format. And I'll take you a little bit around the history about this project. So because this was Melbourne's first protected intersection, there was, of course, a lot of stakeholder engagement. So local bicycle groups, City of Melbourne, the Vic Roads or Department of Transport, other stakeholders, all sitting down and working, is this going to be appropriate for our local context, and what can we do to help mitigate that risk? One of the items of concern was the corner refuge island. So the first kind of iteration was, you can do like just a little galley bean on the ground. We don't want to make it too big because we're just worried that it's going to be struck all the time. They thought, no, it needs to be a little bit bigger than that because, there's a risk that drivers may not even see that and just go straight over that. So that would then led us to our second iteration of this design, where we've got this little croissant shape or boomerang kind of shape. And there was some thinking done behind that. And yeah, this one's a little bit better, but I'm still not really thrilled by the curves of this particular feature, because we do some swept path analysis. We know that, vehicles aren't traveling in this type of movement where it's almost like an acute angle there. They prefer a nice smooth radius, one single radius along the curve there. So that's how they got to this rendition. This one got some good feedback, but there was a bit of concern around how many cyclists you may have queuing adjacent the other side. So you don't want to have so many cyclists that they're either having to access the footpath or they're having to block the path of through movement for a cyclist traveling in the other direction. So that's when the fourth example came about, where they've clearly separated narrowed the corner refuge island itself. It's like a very skinny noodle there. These are all technical terms in case you're wondering. And the fifth example there is kind of what's been installed, and the shaded grey section is that mountable apron. So that is once again been installed because of the swept path analysis completed for the design. and indicating that the heavy vehicles using this route, they need this extra space. As I mentioned, this project did require lots of stakeholder engagement. There were still people not thrilled or not convinced that this product could work, this intervention could work. So in order to get everyone over the line, what they decided to do was make a 1-to-1 scale mock-up of this intersection. So they completely line marked it in this off-road facility. This is in a depot, so there's no public access or anything like that, completely controlled environment. They marked out the intersection and they got all of those stakeholders on bicycles, and they also got a test driver operating within this environment so they could feel firsthand what it felt like to be able to do a left turn, a right turn, how it felt with those corner refuge islands, how it felt when there was lots of pedestrian traffic going on as well. So it's just an aerial of that going on. So they got to really feel what that perspective was like. And yeah, it is quite an expensive exercise to do as part of your stakeholder engagement, but good way to be able to empower your stakeholders to, make them appreciate what cyclists are currently feeling on their network, and also, what this infrastructure does to improve their level of service. So really cool example. I included this as well. Common with protected intersections is when we talked about the heavy vehicle movements, we were talking about, doing nice little refuge islands with mountable aprons to allow for the heavy vehicles, but it's also quite common to have to move the hold line back. So you can see the hold line there, just to be able to cater for heavy vehicle movements as well. So that's just another design consideration. If you're doing your swept path checks, you'll be looking at how is the corner refuge island, how is that particular facility maintaining that movement, and also is the hold line going to have to be shifted to ensure that that heavy vehicle isn't just colliding into. What's going on? Can you see all those laughing?
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody might have found or followed us. He's got their elbow stuck on the laughing emoji or something.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, right. Maybe like a cat or a kitten just jumped up on their computer.
Yeah.
Whew, that was distracting.
I
last week as well, this group did it to me, Ken. I couldn't. It just throws me, completely throws me.
Okay, keep going, Max.
I'll show you an example of this protected intersection at ground level, and this is from the perspective of the cyclist riding through. And we do very conveniently have a taxi here that is performing a left turn. So this really hopefully solidifies why I've been talking about protected intersections for over an hour now, exactly why we're doing this. So this first arrow in this very light yellow color is the traditional path a cyclist would be taking. That green arrow is the vehicle's path as they're turning left. And in a moment in time, this is what this intersection looks like. So once again, the yellow path being a traditional cyclist's path. The green is what the taxi is turning left. And then the purple is what is achieved by this offset. So you can see we're getting taken further away from the intersection. Once again, a moment in time. And I do say a moment in time because this is all happening instantaneously. It's not as if you can just hit the pause on the cyclist as you're riding in real time. This is happening concurrently. So another moment in time. We've got that path there, which is a traditional path that cyclists would take. And then clearly where we are crossing at the moment is much better offset. So if you were a cyclist in the traditional position, you'd need to be making a decision much before this as to whether you would be going through or you have to slow down for that taxi. The other thing I want you to focus on is if you look in the passenger window for this vehicle, the taxi driver, you can see that their neck is kind of pointed towards the cyclist and towards the crossing point, which is exactly the intent of this infrastructure. So it's working exactly as it should be in this instance. So that guy gets a big thumbs up. He's doing great work. When we're thinking about protecting intersections, we have been talking a lot about the conflict point itself, but we also need to consider everything leading up to it. So ensuring that there's clear sight lines leading up to the intersection. So things like parked vehicles are removed or any other physical obstructions. I think this slide does a better job of explaining it. This is from New Zealand, actually, but it's important both from the perspective of the vehicle that's going to be performing a left turn movement and also for the cyclist so they can actually see the vehicle. So it's got both of those functions there. That's why we need to provide that. All right, I'm going to give myself a little breather here. I'll get some water. And I'm going to ask everyone in the chat my favorite question, which is, what's wrong with this photo? So got another confused cyclist there. We've got lots of confused cyclists. I'll get rid of her though. And I might move this out of the way as well so you can have a better look. But in the chat, what do you think's wrong with this photo?
All right. Well, let's see what people pop in there. Oh, lots of things coming in now. This is good. All right. We've got quite a few people talking about the surface condition, the pit in the running lane for bikes, or the grate there, the pit lid. Bit confusing on right of way, it appears, for people. Where do cyclists go? Pointing straight at traffic, direction of travel. That's probably, yeah. Question, is it bidirectional? Is it not? Are they changing the sides of bidirectional? Is it signalized the cyclists to do that, or?
It is bidirectional, and that's correctly identified. They're changing from one side of the carriageway to the other side. So they've created this diagonal crossing.
Yeah. Is it phased in itself? I think it is.
I think it is, yeah. And clearly this cyclist is making the use of that phase as well, although they are not within the designated facility.
Yeah, lots of comments on that one. So good.
There was no real answers I was looking for there. I think all of those are very valid points. We'll give a prize out to the person that mentioned the bidirectional facility kind of changing on either side of this intersection, but quite unusual to see that. Yeah. Did you have any thoughts on this type of way that this has been arranged there, Ken?
Well, yeah. I've looked at a number of these across Australia and then in Canada as well. There's a few interesting ones. You did a good post, I thought, Max, on your LinkedIn about one way to do it, which is, provides that while that car's waiting, it will runs a green light for cyclists to sort of move across and then store and then go. So that was a good one. But yeah, it's always an interesting bit of a challenge. Also challenging when you're changing from bidirectional to single direction and moving them around. Yeah. All right, let's keep ticking on.
All right, let's have a chat about our more conventional intersections now. So we talked about protected. That's what we want to be advocating for, where we're really trying to improve safety on our strategic cycling networks. Not every, we don't have unlimited funds, and we do have supporting treatments that we need to consider. And this is more a discussion around these supporting treatments. So first off is our head start boxes, or giving cyclists, a prime position right at the front of the intersection, this is where you can store and wait for your signal to be called. Ostroads, they've got a few different configurations of this. Example A, B, C, and D. There's some specific guidance for each of those when you may be looking at implementing those. Example A, I think, well, what I'd like to communicate with this, as well as everything that's written within the Ostroads guide, is the head start boxes not only provides that, gives cyclists, they can perch themselves in front of the intersection and obviously be as visible as possible, which is fantastic. But they can also have a clear wayfinding connotation to it as well. So in example A, you may be expecting that a bicycle lane continues straight. You may think that you can turn left at that spot, but it's not really encouraging you to get across there to the right lane, is it? So perhaps there are no cycling facilities in the right lane, and that's why that bike box is not being continued there. If you compared that to example D, where the bicycle box continues across the through and the right turn lane, perhaps that is an example where right turn cyclist traffic is being encouraged or is expected. Therefore, it does provide a little bit of wayfinding. So that's something to consider if you are looking at these examples. The other thing I wanted to note is example C is incredibly rare and not really one that I'd be recommending because it's just confusing to have a really, really narrow bicycle lane that kind of sits in the middle of a through lane and then a separate one for the right turn. I'd be much more encouraging of just like one giant bike box in that facility. But there are a few examples of that occurring, but they make me quite uncomfortable, example C. So I am not a big fan of those ones. When we're also talking about heading towards the intersection, well, we can also think about how we can manage that left turn and through treatment if we are unable to provide the protected intersection. So one way that you can do it is ending the bicycle lane and creating a shared facility through the use of our sharrows, which we've talked about before. And as vehicles enter that space, there's this kind of give way dotted line marking to indicate that, they're entering a different space now. It's a bicycle shared space, so be aware of cyclists, okay? That's one kind of treatment option there. Another one is this, what's referred to as a bent out treatment. So a cyclist bicycle lane, it does remain consistent all the way through to the approach line or hold line at the intersection, and it clearly bends out. Once again, left turn motorists, they do have the give way dotted line marking there. They do cross over the facility to get into the left lane and then continue their journey. Now, ideally, what you would want to see in either of these examples is some kind of, if you could put a speed cushion here, just a small one, just to help slow down vehicle speeds prior to the conflict points. So before they're crossing over the bicycle lane or the cycling facility, they are slowing down. So if there were a collision to occur there, it's likely to be a survivable. And that speed, again, that we were talking about, for those that may have forgotten, is around the 30 km/h mark or below. That's the kind of speed of a vehicle that we want to target where there is a potential interaction with cycling traffic. I'll share a little anecdote from my ride to work in my previous home. I no longer live here, but I used to take this particular route into work. So I was living out east, so the right of the screen, and I had to ride in west to get to the office. And on my ride into work, I was riding on an on-road bicycle facility adjacent to the Dooring Zone. Not a perfect facility by any means, but you know, you kind of get used to riding in those types of things, and yep, it's not perfect, but that's just unfortunately what we have on that network there. So that's what I was riding there. And then as you can see, as I'm approaching this rather large intersection with light rail or trams, the bicycle lane ends, but I do have these sharrows that are indicating that, okay, I don't have to move to the curbside or anything like that. I can perch myself in the middle of the left turn lane here and then continue my journey along there. And it continues in a similar fashion, just on-road, bicycle lane with adjacent to the Dooring Zone. So that was my ride into work. Not great, but not so bad that it made me nervous or change my route or anything like that. My ride home from work, however, similar story to start with, riding in a bicycle lane, whoop, adjacent to the Dooring Zone. As I approach the intersection, so I'm at this point here, nothing. So that's an example of where the provision for cyclists has just completely disappeared and it becomes a free-for-all. And it also becomes a free-for-all in quite a stressful spot because you've got the desire for motorists to get left into the left turn lane, as well as through motorists to carry on through there. So you're kind of trying to work out as a cyclist, do I get in the left and get out of traffic's way? But even though I want to travel through, maybe I should stay in the through lane, and very uncomfortable. So one thing I wanted to iterate with this kind of point here is the idea of, at least within your particular intersection, having consistency where you've got bicycle lanes either side of the intersection, that the facility is consistent. So you're not having different treatments, because you just create this odd environment where both cyclists and motorists may not fully comprehend, you know, why are there changes and why isn't just this the same? So yeah, another thing to make a note of. Another tricky example, which I don't think we've really solved within our, you know, current industry knowledge, is maintaining on-road bicycle lanes if they cross slip lanes, because generally the length of the conflict there is massive. So that's all of that area there is where a vehicle may be getting into that slip lane and crossing over the bicycle lane. To be able to maintain the on-road bicycle lane in those scenarios is extremely challenging. The way that it's basically done is through the use of paints, pavement markings. Okay, so that conflict paint, the green. In this particular example, you can see the green pavement marking actually starts all the way back up here and continues all the way up there. So there's a real large area of that conflict paint to hopefully emphasize to motorists that they are crossing over a cyclist facility, not just where the conflict is, but beyond that. Do I think that that is a significant safety benefit? I wouldn't expect so, but I do think that it is raising the awareness at least. So if we are trying to think of, well, what could we do to help ameliorate or improve this environment for cyclists? And once again, we're looking at things where we can create much more obvious conflict points that are, you know, not 100 meters long, but much more distinct. They cross in a perpendicular fashion. So you could be looking at something that looks more like this, where a cyclist facility perhaps gets taken off-road, adjacent, perhaps there's a footpath there, and then there's crossing at one distinct location across the slip lane. This feature here could also be raised. You know, you could be able to do a wombat crossing there or something like that, and then crossing over in that fashion there. Now, the reason I say that with a little bit of skepticism is because cyclists who are riding in environments that look like this is from memory, this is 80 kilometers per hour, could be 70. I find it difficult to believe that they would take a path like this to continue their journey. Cyclists would already feel comfortable riding, in that environment, despite the risks. We know that there's risks in doing that. We know that collisions at speeds that high are likely to be very severe, if not fatal. So if you were to provide something that looked like that off-road facility and completely took away that on-road, you may have cyclists that then use the traffic lane, which would be a worse situation than having no on-road facility. So there's always this, pros and cons of everything. And as we alluded to in our prior discussion, where you will have risks no matter what kind of design configuration you go with. It's a matter of trying to articulate what those risks are, what are the severity of crashes that you're talking about, and what is kind of the best outcome for this particular environment. So just some food for thought in that scenario. Hook turns. We have lots and lots and lots of hook turns here in Melbourne, both for general traffic and also for cyclists. And the idea behind them is, rather than cyclists have to try and get themselves over into a right turn lane, they can just aim to prop and wait, kind of like a storage area or a head start box. Stay there, wait for their phase, and then perform their right turn kind of in these two movements. Now, there's a few examples I'll take you through here, but so say if you're at the bottom of the screen, you're a cyclist in this bicycle lane, you'd be able to head straight to this hook turn box. It'd be a red light for you going that direction. Once it goes green, then you can continue your movement. The reason that you're advocating for this is because it saves you having to get across into that right turn lane and then put yourself in that position and do a right turn across there. The other good thing about this particular example is if you were a cyclist, I'm going to get rid of that drawing and do that again. If you were a cyclist in the right turn lane and crossing like this, this is another example of the light rail tracks. And that angle there is actually relatively acute. So this isn't in the quiz or anything. It's just I happen to be quite interested in this topic. But where cyclists are crossing over light rail tracks, you want to ensure that path is between 60 to 90 degrees. And this particular movement, I don't think it's going to meet that criteria. So there's a potential that cyclists' tires will get stuck in that tram track, and then you obviously have an issue there with cyclists falling off their bike. There's a motorist that's following them, and there's potential further collisions there. But that's what that particular hook turn looks like there on the ground. Just a nice little bit of pavement marking, bit of paint. Another way you could look to do that at a T intersection. Ken, do you want me to stop there or?
Oh, just one back on the one you were just looking at. It was a specific question around, is there a reason why the right turn storage isn't closer to the curb? Oh.
Yeah, so I think if you put the right turn storage here, that's what I'm suggesting. Is that how you're reading it?
Yeah.
I'm guessing, and I could be wrong, there's a left turn arrow there.
Yeah.
Which means when that goes green, that cyclist is in the way.
Yeah, that's right.
If you put them there, then they're okay to do their left turn. They're not blocking traffic, and then they can go when the throughs phase is on.
Yeah, that's it. It's it is. So you can run that other phase as well.
Yeah.
Did you want me to show a little video of riding one?
Oh, go on. Go on, you.
Yeah, I'm going to steal your screen. Hopefully that works. Does that work? You seeing the screen?
It is. Yeah, I can.
Oh, good. So here we go. There you go, riding up into one. And that's the one there. Pop yourself in. Wait for the lights to change. And off you go. Not my favorite one out there, I'll tell you that. And I've never liked this bit where I'm getting cars shooting by me, but nonetheless, it is a cyclist hook then.
Wonderful example. Thank you, Ken.
No worries.
All right, let's continue. I was just going to talk about a T-intersection environment and another instance where you can use this type of, it's not quite a hook term, but this idea, kind of a bypass facility is, if you could imagine if a cyclist wanted to turn right going from the bottom of the screen, it'd be pretty uncomfortable to get across both those lanes of traffic and then turn right. So instead, just giving them an option adjacent the carriageway there. You could put a little pedestal there so they can push their button. And then once they've got the phase to go, they can just cross in that fashion. There's an example I managed to find. This is in Adelaide of this kind of treatment in place, although it is kind of crossing adjacent to pedestrian facilities as well. But yeah, rather than cyclists have to try and get over here into those right turn lanes, they're able to just prop and wait and cross over there. So quite a good example. This one is not signalized, but it has a similar philosophy. This is a mid-block crossing where they're trying to get cyclists from this side of the carriageway to the other side of the carriageway. And so they're actually saying, cyclists, you can hop on the footpath area here at the moment, cross over there, and then continue your journey across like that. So it's kind of using a left turn to go right is basically what the hook turn idea is all about. Some cyclists obviously will not do that and will just take the path of least resistance, but at least it's being used there for those that feel more comfortable in taking a staged approach, and having the little median there as well helps with things as well. Okay, I wanted to share another anecdote. This one is, as you can see, a phenomenally large intersection, and one where cycling facilities do exist. And I'll just show you what this looks like on the ground. It does look different now, for those wondering if you have familiar with this intersection. But just the stand-up lane looks different. There's still all of that traffic and all the median traffic tram lanes as well. All of that is still existing. It's just this particular stand-up looks different. And I wanted to talk about the bicycle signals of this particular intersection. So we've got right on the edge here just an additional panel that has been installed, which has the green bicycle signal. And that has been installed so cyclists, they get the first run at the intersection. So everyone else will have red, except the cyclists, they get about a 5-second head start and they can start riding through the intersection. And critical to that is that they can ride through the intersection. So it is actually saying, cyclists, you have a through connection. The reason I mentioned that, so it's trying to communicate to cyclists that this is the path that you can take. So I should have confirmed that that photo was taken from the bottom there. Okay. When I was at this intersection, I lived to the east once again and wanted to perform a right turn maneuver. So I actually wanted to head in that direction. When I saw the bicycle symbol go, the green phase, I immediately assumed that that meant, cyclists, you're free to perform your movements. So I started my journey and went to do this right turn. However, there was a point in time where the general traffic stream, they also get their green. So I probably got stuck about here when vehicles in the other direction, they got their green. And then I had this very awkward, confusing spot where I was like, oh, I thought I had the phase, so I was free to turn right. But it was actually, you know, trying to communicate those signals that you're free to go through. So I just wanted to include that as a bit of an anecdote to show that have a think about how the signals may be interpreted by your cycling community. And if there are specific movements associated with the signals, then being clear about that. So that can be through the use of additional arrows and things like that, or supplementary signage cyclists must travel through, or anything like that. Just wanted to share that basically. This is an example in Perth where the bicycle signals are attached onto the signal face itself. So it's all kind of just one unit. And it is carried along all of the mid-block section here. Along the corridor. So it's not just intermittent. It's taken a corridor approach. And I really like that as an idea because there really is quite a wonderful feeling being a cyclist and getting to get your green first. So you get to head into the intersection first. Particularly if you've got lots of cyclists within this bay here, and they all need to come in and converge or merge into another bicycle lane at the departure side of this intersection. Giving them the green first just gives everyone the ability, you know, to warm up the legs and really start to accelerate, because as you can appreciate, it's a lot slower than just accelerating a car. Just gives cyclists that extra opportunity, that time to be able to achieve all that without having to worry about someone behind you, you know, potentially going to be blaring their horn and wanting to get around you. It's already been achieved. So I really think that installing the bicycle signals is a terrific investment and something that should be considered at your signalized intersections. Right, that is the end of today's session. I do just want to go through the LMS once more, just so we've got all the content down pat and we understand everything going on. Another example here of our temporary traffic management treatments. This specific example is actually when the protected intersection in Melbourne was being constructed. This is what they had part of their temporary traffic management as part of what they were building, such a wonderful cycling infrastructure treatment. And once again, if you are delivering any construction treatment on the bicycle network or there's existing cycling facilities, considering where are cyclists going to go? What are they going to do next? Because previous to this point, this cyclist was riding in a protected facility. It's only coming up to here that it goes onto an on-road facility. Now, just simply saying bicycle lane closed, merge right is a completely inappropriate way to be doing things. Once again, the kind of parallel would be traffic lane closed, merge right, without any taper or anything like that. And also, a cyclist may not feel comfortable in merging right at all. They may have chose this route because they wanted a protected bicycle lane and they didn't know about this. And you're just putting them in quite a precarious situation. So strongly encourage you to have a think about how your cycling facilities may be impacted and potential detours that could be offered off the road environment. Even if it means mingling with pedestrians, it's likely going to have a more favorable outcome for cyclists in that environment than trying to pick your spots in general traffic there. Ken?
No, it's a good point, and it's that TMR's got some stuff associated with considerations for cyclists at roadworks, which I think is good. We need a lot more of that that done. There were a couple of lagging questions which I didn't quite get to injecting at the time. It's kind of associated with your comment around putting a speed cushion just at that turn point or merge point into the left turn facility.
Yeah.
And so one question was around, is there potential for that to increase rear end type crashes?
Yeah, that is probably valid. I suppose there already would be an expectation if you're approaching an intersection in the left lane, there is a dedicated left lane. There would be an expectation that there would be vehicles slowing anyway. But I suppose it just depends on how harsh that speed cushion is. If it was like something that's slowing them down to 10 kilometers, then that would probably greatly increase the risk of rear end crashes. But if it's just trying to provide, an additional control there to bring speeds to 30 kilometers or below, it also depends on what the existing operating environment is.
Yep.
Yeah, but no, it's a valid concern. I think that's right in saying that.
Yep. And on that, there was Nick was just sort of clarifying that they tend to put the Sharrow before the conflict point or the merge point to sort of as a more a pre-warning as a little bit. And somebody else had commented by the Sharrow and the left turn for in the Sharrow in the left turn lane, is that trying to also designate that the cyclist can carry on straight?
Yeah, good question. So in that specific example, yes. I wouldn't necessarily say in all examples you could assume that, because possibly if you're in the left turn lane, you should be turning left as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's traditionally designated just at a point where that bit of pavement is shared by those road users, cyclists and vehicles. So that's not but it is certainly that in that one, yes, the cyclist would go straight through as well.
And perhaps if that curb looked different, if that curb was like that, oh, that's a terrible drawing. But you know what I mean? Like if that departure side wasn't as wide, then if a cyclist had to go diagonally across to get into that bicycle lane, that's when it wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah. So Thomas is saying then, should we have a Sharrow with a left arrow and a straight arrow as a left through Sharrow? Never seen it, but I'd like it. Although you show a four-way Sharrow at some
The
point.
Sharrow flower, yeah, we did that last
flower.
module. Yeah.
Where does that come in? Okay, all right. Show us through the LMS so everybody knows what they need to do to finish. And
awesome. So, module 3, intersection treatments. We do have another 360-degree video that we'll get you to watch after today's session. It is on the topic of intersections, funnily enough. You'll get to see what it feels like riding through Melbourne Protected Intersection. So please have that completed by Thursday. And of course, we also have a quiz for today. So similar to Module 1 quiz, got 3 opportunities to complete all of that. If you've got any questions or not sure about the content, feel free to reach out. I did want to share one more example, if I can just, because I just love sharing examples, of the site in Toowoomba of an intersection, which I think is quite interesting. I'll just turn it around here so you've got a bit more of an idea. But there's an on-road bicycle path adjacent to the Dooring zone, and they want to try and get that away from the left turn treatment that's coming up at this intersection. So they're actually coloring this whole rectangle here to bring cyclists across. So this whole area has been awarded as the conflict zone, where cyclists will be kind of traveling diagonally across from that corner there over here. And the reason being, the left turn movement there is incredibly strong. So there's lots of motorists turning left there, but the desire for cyclists is through. So it's just trying to manage that conflict. Didn't want to suggest this is best case scenario, best practice. Protected intersection could be looked at in this type of example, but just a fun little example. We get lots of these little submissions from participants, so I love to see what others share, and I just thought I'd share that with the group as well.
Great.
Cool.
All right. Well, I think everybody's fairly happy. The emojis are going nuts, which
maybe one person just really happy.
Yeah. I'm thinking that is.
It's a great emoji team we've got.
Yeah. It's somebody's rapid firing or has worked out that. Good. Get your quizzes done. If you're lagging behind on anything, catch up. Next session on Thursday is our last session with you. Max has got a nice special little assignment for you to do, which won't take you too long, but it's something extra to do. So nice to clear your slate of any of those other little quizzes or tasks, and get ready for that.
Fantastic. Have a great day. I'll see you Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
See you, everyone.